This video actually was published sometime before the live letter. Let me actually check it out. It was published on June 27th, so I'm not sure how relevant it's going to be, but I'm actually just kind of weirdly curious to hear what Quasi has to say about this. As I've been playing FF a lot more than what I used to before while I was just doing the MSQ, I have been noticing some things that I just kind of wanted to comment on that include the glam dresser, maybe some job changes and whatnot. So I'm just curious to hear like what someone who's been pretty much on the same journey as myself for that amount of time has to say about this.
Final Fantasy XIV as Yoshi P and team takes.
Oh,
This
okay,
week
for the
could be a
start.
pivotal week for Final Fantasy XIV as Yoshi
And
P
it
and team
was.
takes to the air on Friday to talk about patch 6.2. A lot of us are looking forward to the new features that will be previewed, including island sanctuaries and Criterion dungeons. And I've covered them already.
Honestly, I was hoping they would give us a little bit more on island sanctuaries. I think, considering it's such a visual feature, I was hoping that they would give us like some actual like previews and video footage on like what it's gonna look like or whatever. And I was a little just kind of bummed to see that they didn't. But there's gonna be that second part of the live letter, so hopefully we're gonna be able to see more.
In my patch 6.2 preview video, link to the top right if you want to check that out. But in essence, everyone is excited about all those new features because those could be a core part of the gameplay experience for years to come. Now we don't know what to expect, so we can only wait with bated breath. But I think it's also a perfect moment, given we are talking about the future of Final Fantasy XIV, to give some thought about how we want the game to evolve over the next 10 years. Now, if you've been following the news of Final Fantasy XIV, Yoshi P did say that he wants to make this game his legacy, meaning he's not gonna stop working
He's
on the game
already done
anytime
it.
soon. And not too long ago, he mentioned that Final Fantasy XIV is something that they're designing to work for the next 10 years. And in Producer Live Letter 68, he outlined plans for the next 10 years. So in today's video, I'd like to present my own wish list of where I hope Final Fantasy XIV is going in the next 10 years. Now before we start, let me set the tone first. I feel like with Endwalker, Final Fantasy XIV has already turned the corner, and the issue
Like before we start, I just wanna say that like this is something that people talk about all the time, Twitter, on Reddit, and whatnot. But what irks me a little bit is that sometimes people will be a little unreasonable when with what they want and the time span in which they want that. And usually these like unrealistic suggestions come from people who don't really know much about game development, unfortunately. So I just want to say, while some of these things we clearly know are possible, like I don't know, when we talk about the glam dresser, we know that there are better systems out there in other MMORPGs that could be used as an example. But Yoshi P, I think, did say that they tried to do something about the glam dresser and that for some reason they couldn't like put it in the system or whatever. I'm not quoting. This is just a very very rough estimate of what he said, but sometimes it is not as easy to edit an engine and a system that's been there for many many years. And I don't know how ambitious it would be to say that I'm hoping that Final Fantasy XIV does get a revamp in the next 10 years when it comes to that, so that the system is a lot less clogged and a lot more open to adding like these features and changes. But I know nothing about the game development itself. I just know these basics that I'm basing these things that I say upon. So I can't really say, oh, this is what they need to do or this is what, like, if it was possible, they already would have done it by now, I think.
horrible 1.0 launch is very, very far back in everyone's memory now. It's not even something worth talking about. Convincing people to give the game a second chance. That was no doubt the hardest part, which is why I think the future is bright. Because they keep hitting record amount of registered accounts, which means that new players are constantly coming in, and sure, it might not be coming in as fast now that
Honestly, I think new players are coming in so fast. Like I've been doing roulettes in the past few days, and if I queue into a dungeon, I'm mostly queuing with at least two or three sprouts. Like there's so many new people.
We are in between major content patches, but the game continues to grow. It's also very evident from Square Enix's quarterly financial performances. Final Fantasy XIV subscription continues to carry the company. Now, why did I provide that context? Because technically with more success in the game, they now can go on to do more ambitious things. And we have already seen that Yoshi P and team have presented the graphical upgrades, which by the way I can't wait for to come to the game. I do think that the graphical engine within the game is slightly dated. I remember going through the Endwalker MSQs and I know there were certain scenes that were very dimly lit. So the facial features, the characters, the expressions, you can't really see them properly because of the limitations of the graphical engine basically.
Some devs wouldn't even like go back and fix like the old models or the old structures or whatever. The fact that they are going back and fixing these things that people obviously are still playing through, still queuing into, even at the max level when they do their roulettes or when they play their New Game Plus or whatever. It's actually really nice and really impressive that they tackled on such a big thing.
Eorzea looks amazing, and I can't wait to see it through a different lens. But this is one good example of, with a bigger budget, what Yoshi P and team can do for the game in the next 10 years.
Amazing.
So on to the wish.
Yeah, it's like we're forgetting that they didn't have as much money before. Like what they've made, I feel like wasn't it's a great game nonetheless, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it wasn't well equipped to impress millions and millions of people, because I feel like they couldn't predict what happened last year. And they have an amazing game at its core, but in comparison to what people expect, people who play other, I don't know, MMORPGs or RPGs or action RPGs that look super, super realistic and immersive, I feel like they see Final Fantasy as a humble product with a lot of potential, but still not a lot of things that have been done to attract those people who are attracted to beautiful, immersive, realistic games that are constantly being published and announced. But now they do have more money, and we now see that money is going to the right place. It's going towards actually improving the game, and the changes that they do, I don't know much about them, but it's clear that they are so expensive. And I'm just happy to know that after a year of being a part of the community, that the money we gave to Square Enix, that it's at least being spent on something good for us.
Wish list. The way I think about my own wish list, there's not a single element that will be a game changer on its own. However, if you compound the improvements over a whole series of changes and feature rollouts, I think it will position the game really well for growth in the next 10 years. The first thing on my wish list, Glamour systems. Let's talk about the good stuff. When I first got in touch with the Glamour system, I was absolutely blown away by how most pieces could be dyed individually as a component. Meaning for every single slot, most of the items can be changed in terms of color variation and not just like simple color choices. There's like different shades of red, there's different shades of blue, there's a massive amount.
And there's also like what impressed me even more so than that is the fact that there are different textures and materials on different pieces of clothing that affect how that dyeing process is going to turn out. Like Dalamud red is not going to look the same on two pieces of clothing that have different materials. Like for example, one can be shiny, one is like a little bit of a little bit rough and shadowed. Like all these things can be seen, especially like through G-pose and stuff, and that's what really what took my breath away.
Amount of color combinations that you can explore. Sometimes all it takes is just a color change and you have an entirely new outfit, and it feels different. Some of the paint have different reflective textures, some of them are metallic in nature, some of them more shiny than the others. It's a phenomenal part of the Glamour system and I love it. I think we all can recognize that Glamour is a huge part of the game. There are some people who exist only to basically create Glamour sets. Their life is essentially a fashion show within Final Fantasy XIV. They are always on the hunt for the next outfit to wear. And I think a lot of goodwill can be gained if the Glamour system is improved. How so? Right now, there's a slot limitation in terms of the amount of Glamour pieces you can store away. And
I've been thinking about this so much, because as someone who does go into like old dungeons, old raids to farm these pieces. I don't want to just throw them away because they're easy to farm. Because I know that I'm not going to intentionally queue into, I don't know, World of Darkness to farm those boots because those are the boots that I need. I'd rather just go onto the market board and just buy other boots if I don't have access to them. And as I've been storing like a lot of my glam pieces to my retainers, like I just keep wondering why it's not possible for them to give access to our retainer inventory the same way they give access to the armor to the armory dresser thing where you store your like seasonal stuff. I don't understand like that space is just not being used because there's plenty of room to put your like rewards, achievement awards, event stuff and whatnot in that, but a lot of people just have it empty. And then you have retainers. Like if you can click on the button to like when you're making your glam plate, if you can click on the button and request the access to armoire, I think that's what it's called, and see that. Why isn't there a third button to just switch to retainer menu? Why can we not see all these things? Like it would make life so much easier because even if you have two retainers, you have like what 175 slots per retainer. That is more than 300 slots overall that you could have for your glam dresser, and you could store so many items. It's just if you want to like let's say you want to collect these glam appearances from like the I don't know the quest rewards that you get when you finish a job quest or whatever. Like I've been leveling my jobs and I've been getting those sets, and some of those sets look so good. Like the Shadowbringer ones that you get from Undo Cups, some of them look really nice. The Endwalker sets look glorious. Like if you play all the jobs, or you don't have to play all the jobs, but what if you want to glam all your jobs to just look good when you switch into that job or whatever? Because some of the gear is just so job specific. You can only wear that piece on a particular one. Like if you just want to get those sets, that's like already like more than half of your space just gone just for that one thing that you're getting your stuff from. Like I know that people are going to say not all the pieces are good, some pieces look the same as something else, but like it just really kills my drive and my urge to actually collect things. And if I could just access my retainer space, that I think that would be like what's it called in English, like a band-aid fix or whatever. Like if I could just do that, I would be so much happier because that would be insta like 300 slots or whatever. Because I've been tossing so much gear from like old dungeons, and every time I want to make more room, I have to go through my entire glam dresser to be like, is this something that I've ever worn? Is this something that I'm planning on wearing? It's like I have to toss it all out. There's no sense of accomplishment, no sense of progression. It's just basically the game telling me that I have to make a meaningful choice over what's going to be in my dresser, and it just feels so bad.
Chances are, if you've already played the game for a few years now, you already have to prune some of your item slots within your glamour dresser. There's just too many good looking outfits and pieces in the game. What's the alternative? Well, some people file away those extra glamour items away in retainers, which by the way is an entirely different hassle in terms of looking up certain items. You can search for items using your console, but then just to retrieve, let's say, this X piece of glamour item that you have stored away last year, you probably have to go through your retainer menus, and there's a few layers of different menus that you have to go through in order to finally retrieve it. The system that I would love to see is that upon obtaining a certain piece of item, for the system to be able to file away the fact that you have gained access to this glamour piece, and you can delete that item and still retain the ability to change into that glamour for that slot. Now, this technology already exists in other MMORPGs, and I understand there's technical limitations, but I think this will be absolutely amazing. On top of that, they can make it a collection system. For example, imagine a feature within the game where you can scroll through every single...
Imagine how frustrated some people would be, like if they put this into the game, but the game didn't like remember that you were already like in an XYZ dungeon or whatever, and that you farmed a certain piece. Like maybe people would think that it's a small sacrifice to like go back and farm these items from the dungeons and raids that they've already been to. But some glam pieces are actually rare, and for someone who likes to collect things for the sake of collecting them, like myself, I would feel kind of bummed that now the game is treating me like I have nothing and I have to like go and do everything else to just make that happen.
Single slot in terms of the headpiece, the chest piece, the pants that you can be wearing, and you can scroll through all the options. You can see which of the pieces you actually have not collected, and for those that you have not collected, maybe the system can even tell you where to farm it. I think these quality of life changes will elevate the entire Glamour system, and I think that will actually help retention with the game, especially amongst the more casual audiences. Now, I understand there's technical limitations to make this happen. That's why we're talking about the next 10 years, because I believe with time and resources, they potentially can make it happen.
It's just so sad that it wasn't already there, because I feel like I don't want to sound apocalyptic or anything like that, because the game has gained so many new players over the past couple of years or so. But if we're talking about this, I feel like in a way the damage has already been done a little bit, because a lot of people are already so frustrated with the system that they've kind of lost the drive to do this, and otherwise they would be all over these like old dungeons and raids and whatnot, farming these items. But so many people are disappointed with the system that they just don't get to enjoy this kind of end game the way they would want to, and some people have probably also moved on.
One final thing for Glamour, something to tie everything together. I think it would be really cool to have weekly or even monthly community-led Glamour competitions.
Yes.
For example, the Final Fantasy XIV Twitter can put out a weekly challenge centered around a certain theme. For example, this week is dressing up like pirates. Players can submit their own screenshots, and the winners can be determined by a fan vote. It's something that's really simple, it doesn't cost much to run at all, and Final Fantasy XIV can give away just cool merchandises or swags as prizes. All I'm saying is that the Glamour system has a lot of potential. They already have a good base. Now, there's some great parts about the base, there's some parts that I think improvements are in order, but it has a lot of potential, and one can dream about the possibilities. Next up on my wish list is regarding down syncing. I think one of the smartest things they have done is they have introduced roulettes that keeps old content relevant, old dungeons relevant. For example, when I do roulettes and I queue into some of my old favorite dungeons from previous expansions, and you hear your favorite OST from back in the days like the Long Fall in the Twinning Dungeon, it's always very nostalgic, and I think they're really smart to make old content relevant through roulettes. However, the part that doesn't feel great is how the downsyncing is implemented. In an ideal world, I hope that we can keep all our current job abilities at our current level when you get downsynced. And you might say, what's the big deal about
because like you have to learn every job at that level when you queue into like an old piece of content, and there's like a new optimal rotation for every like 10 levels or whatever, because some abilities you don't have access to, and you have to like keep that in mind because they're just like grayed out on your menu. I guess that makes sense.
Losing a few abilities. Well, I'll give you an example. As a paladin main, I'm used to having gap closers in recent content. However, if I go back to do Heaven's Wall content, suddenly I'm without gap.
I do the same thing. Like I just spam my gap closers and I'm not moving anywhere, and I'm like, damn. You know, I remember every time that I just can't play the game the way I would like to.
Closers. And it kind of feels weird because suddenly I feel so clunky in terms of mobility. And this is just one good example. I think some people talk about low-level dungeons where you do not have access to your AoE abilities as something that is tedious. And I can totally relate to what they're saying. Now, I understand...
Like, they could reduce the amount of damage that you do with your AoEs, or reduce the amount of healing or whatever. I get that it requires work and just very careful scaling and balancing of all the content, but I think he has a point here.
And why they do not actually want us to have our full range of job kits and abilities available to us in older dungeons. One reason...
I mean, maybe because if you queue into the dungeon with a full skill set of, let's say, level 90, and you're doing or 80, whatever, you queue into a leveling dungeon, you queue into Sastasha, and you have like all these abilities available to you, but you're also queuing with a person who is level 16 and who actually doesn't have these abilities, who's there for the first time. And maybe the dungeon and the whole content will be made easy, really easy, because now you have these abilities that if you didn't have them, it would make the combat more challenging and more equal for everyone.
Thing is that those old design and encounters are designed around those job kits and abilities back in the days. But I would also argue that another way around it is basically to tweak the potencies when you are being downscaled, meaning you keep all your job abilities, but you put a cap in terms of potency for, let's say, the newer abilities.
Some things are not just about damage. Let's say, I don't know, when we talk about gap closers or the fact that you can do this or that, I think they would make the dungeons a lot, or any kind of content a lot easier if you queue into it with the full skill set when you're playing with someone who doesn't have their full skill set, and it would feel more like a carry for that person.
Abilities that you fear might be too overpowered in old content. I know of players who actively avoid older content just because they don't like to be downsynced and they lose abilities from their job. They actually don't enjoy the experience of having to go back to an older rotation when they are already so familiar with their current job abilities and they're so in sync with their current rotation. I think from a technical feasibility standpoint, if they can figure a way to basically allow us to go back to do old content with our current job abilities kept the same by just tweaking potency values, I think there'll be a massive plus for replayability of Final Fantasy XIV going forward into the next 10 years. Don't forget, as we continue to get new expansions, the pile of old dungeon and old content will continue to grow, and therefore there's a more important need to make sure downsyncing is as appealing as possible to many players. So that is second on my wish list. Next up on my wish list, housing. And I know this is a hot topic. We started off with just the placard method, which was rampant with botters and auto clickers and auto macros. That was how you were supposed to get a house. And then we moved to a lottery system, which I think it's a more fair system, but I always still see a lot of disappointing comments that they have missed out on the lottery. And having seen people decorate their houses firsthand, I think owning and decorating a house is an experience that
it just feels bad, because sometimes it feels like the game is mocking you, especially when you are doing, let's say you're doing an event and your event reward is like a house furniture, like the only thing that you can buy from a vendor is a house furniture, or you're doing like a side quest line. Let's say you're doing I don't want to spoil too much, but you're doing the Stormblood side trials or whatever, and then you come to the end of the quest line, like after you've beat all the trials, you do one more quest and you get a piece of furniture. It's like, this is great, Square, but like, where do I put my, like, first of all, like, you have a limited retainer space. If you want to hold on to all these items, you actually have to like put them into a retainer and keep a slot like occupied by a housing item that might not be available for purchase later if you're doing an event, or something that you don't want to throw away because it's a one-time thing from a quest. So some people may have their retainers full of stuff that they want to put into their house, but they don't have a house. So those slots are just forever blocked, because it's not like in Sims, like where you have your list of things that you can put into your house, like unlocked appearances for the house or whatever. It's not like that. You actually have to like take an item out of your bag. Maybe that would be a good idea, you know, for these like items to be like the way transmog is in World of Warcraft, like what we talked about before, like how you suggested, you know, just kind of the game remembering that you want that thing at some point. Like, what if you could have like a Sims-like experience where you have these unlocked appearances that you once unlocked through an event or whatever, and then like when you take them out, they show up as like whatever, a shadow or whatever. You just like slam them inside of a house. That would be awesome.
all Final Fantasy XIV players should be able to experience, not just only for the lucky ones who won the lottery. Honestly, the sky is the limit when it comes to decorating your own house. That is replayable content by itself. I understand it's a resource hog to be providing housing for everyone in the game, but again, we are talking about a wish list where Yoshi P and team has resources to make things happen. I would love for instance housing to be a thing. Now, the island sanctuaries they will preview on Friday.
Like, they say that they want people to have this experience where they're like neighbors with other people and stuff. But I can tell you, as someone who does own an FC house, I don't have a house of my own. Except for like some very rare events and instances where you'll have people actively spending time in front of their house and seeing other people, if they know that, I don't know, if they know people from another FC, and if they by chance have an FC house nearby, from time to time they will see people there, or which is more likely next to the market board or next to the retainer bell or whatever. I think I think it's just silly to believe in, like, I don't know, a neighborhood environment when no one hangs out around their house for that long uh, at all. Maybe during some events, yes, but mostly people are either queued or they're doing some sort of side content or whatever. And I think it would be just really nice if everyone could gain access to that experience. Because if you want to subscribe to the game, because housing is one of the features, you kind of expect that you are at least, I don't know, at least able to get that house. And it's just kind of sad that that kind of feature is just apparently not for everyone.
They might solve that to a certain extent, although Yoshi P and team have also told us to temper our expectations regarding island sanctuaries. I do feel like some form of instance housing, whether it's the form of an island, whether it's the form of a proper house, or whether it's the form of a large apartment, I think giving everyone the experience of decorating one's house, hosting your friends and showing off your belongings, that is an experience that everyone should be able to go through. And honestly, they keep releasing new furnitures every now and then. There's always ways to continuously improve the look and feel of your house. That sounds like a good retention tool to me. But I think the biggest frustration is being able to access a house in the first place. And if they can remove that as a blocker, I think it will add a lot of replayability to the game. The other thing about instance housing is that it solves a long time complaint of housing, which is if you want to stop your subscription of the game, you will potentially lose your plot of land. And I understand why this rule was here in the first place. Yoshi P and team obviously doesn't want people hogging land when they are unsubscribed from the game, because it should be left for the active players to play. Or what if someone wants to take a 1-year break from the game? I think everyone is entitled.
That's the problem. It's like it feels like houses are there for the most hardcore players ever. And especially like if you like, I don't even know what happens if you want to change your like world or your data center or whatever. Let's say like you don't take your house with you. Let's say I wanted to, I don't know, go to a different world or whatever. Like I couldn't because I have an obligation as an FC founder, leader, whatever, to be subscribed to the game and to be on that world forever, because that is where our FC house is. It is very limiting from that point of view, because there were times when I contemplated, making a journey to another, I don't know, to another world to just see what, I don't know, what the communities are like there so that I could interact or whatever. I can visit, but I can't I can't move there at any point, not even for a little bit, to experience that. I don't think I'm able to do that. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's possible.
From Final Fantasy XIV. And I do know of people who actually do not stop their subscription simply because they want to hold on to their house, even though they don't really play the game much actively because they're taking a break and life circumstances have changed, but they do intend to come back eventually. Instance housing would solve this dilemma of
It's just like basically paying for rent. Even if you go on a vacation or whatever, you still have to be paying for rent to, I don't know, keep your residence, which really reminds you of like the way things are in real life, which is something that no one really wants to be reminded of.
being forced to pay a subscription if you're trying to hold on to a very valuable plot of land. Again, I caveat, I know it's an intense technical and resource hog to give everyone housing. Well, we are talking about a decade's worth of progress. Maybe they can make it happen. Next up on my wish list is actually the front-end system of Final Fantasy XIV. The hardest part by far for me when playing the game is actually buying the game and accessing the game and installing the game.
Yes.
That is the hardest part of Final Fantasy XIV. It is not ultimate rates, it's not housing, it's actually buying the game. I'm willing to venture that, like me, there are people who stumbled upon Final Fantasy XIV themselves. They have no one to ask, and they don't know how to buy the game. I was very confused about the storefront on NA, and then there's the JP version of the store and the EU version of the Square Enix store. And I didn't know whether it was the same if I purchased them through the various regions. I went with NA anyway, and the next problem I had was creating my account, because I could not find Singapore amongst the list of country of residences. So funny story, the first account I ever created for Square Enix for Final Fantasy XIV, my address is actually a McDonald's somewhere in Ohio in the US. I could almost imagine there are people who drop out during this process of trying to install and access the game, and these
I had to I had to put the address where I used to live, like in Slovenia, before, because I couldn't find my country on the list. It's something that so many of us face. It's like I just don't understand why they're not there.
these are lost opportunities for Final Fantasy XIV to show people what a great game it is. It's such a shame, because first impressions, they do matter. So I do hope they fix the front end. And I know people don't prefer to play Final Fantasy XIV through Steam, but at least the Steam user interface and front end is relatively easier to
They're
navigate.
familiar.
And while
Yeah.
we're talking about the front end systems, it would be great if they can.
But I don't know, like I don't prefer, like, there's so many games that I play through Steam, but if we're talking MMO, I don't like playing MMOs through Steam because I feel like Steam sometimes, like, for at least I've had bad luck with it. Like from time to time I will just keep getting these emails where people are like trying to hack into my account and are trying to log in, sometimes with the wrong password, sometimes with the correct password, which is scary. I keep changing my password and I don't have any, like, I don't know, any like security breaches, not that I'm aware of or anything like that, like not with any other stuff. It's just Steam. From time to time there's always a random person from India or whatever who's like desperately trying to get into my account to play my 4 games. No, I do have more games, but I don't think that's their point.
So update the mock station. What do I mean? A mock station seems to be like a legacy browser system where, for instance, on the homepage you see, let's say, a series of items. Let's say there are 8 of them on the homepage. I'm not able to right click on all of them and browse them in a new tab. In order to browse through all 8 of them on the homepage, I have to click onto the first one and then click the back button, and then click on the second one, and click the back button again, rinse and repeat. It does feel like it's coded for browsers many eons ago, and is in need of a refresh and a revamp. After all, buying the game and accessing the mock station is contributing directly to the revenues of the game. If there's any quality of life fix that they should be incentivized to look into, I think it's probably this component.
I think so.
And there's one last thing on my wish list that, for lack of a better word, I will call a hook. What do I mean? Well, Yoshi-P has said that their intention is to make Final Fantasy XIV as solo-friendly as possible, which is quite a smart decision actually, because the strongest selling point of Final Fantasy XIV is the MSQs, no doubt. The single-player story.
Yeah.
And that's why they're going back to update all the trust systems, etc. I think he even confirmed that this strategy is working. In his recent interviews, he's saying that he's seen a lot of solo players, new players come to the game because of all these changes. Which is great, by the way, but as a wish list, as something that
How do you identify someone as a solo player? It's like sometimes, like, even if you are not a solo player going through MSQ, you're not going to be in a party with someone, or even if you are, from time to time a person will just be kicked out of the party because you have to do a duty. Like, how do you know if someone is like not playing with anyone?
I'm thinking about for the next 10 years, for the game to grow sustainably, I think it's important that when someone finishes the MSQs, you give them a reason to hang out, to stay in the world of Eorzea, to contribute to this living and breathing MMORPG. It's called MMORPG for a reason. Massive multiplayer online. One of the core experiences that makes Final Fantasy XIV unique is that when you go to Limsa, it's bustling and there's all these people around in town. There's a social aspect to the game. And I do think catering to solo players is important, but I think equally important for a sustainable growth is not to only attract players, but also to retain them, to give them a reason to continue playing the game, to be invested in the community, even after they finish the MSQs. Because I will venture a guess that a good number of people
I feel like when you finish the MSQ, Final Fantasy 14 gives you a lot of freedom to pick your own content. It has plenty of content, but it's not really pushing you in any direction. And I feel like some people do need that little bit of a nudge. You know, something that will directly pop in front of their face and incentivize them to do this or to do that or whatever. Like, for example, for me, what was interesting in World of Warcraft, even though World of Warcraft itself has many issues, World of Warcraft did have this calendar where, or it still does, like, where when you click on like today's date, you like the entire month opens up, and then there's like these little pictures on different dates telling you when a certain like repeatable monthly event or weekly event or whatever is starting, when it's ending, and even like if you farmed like a certain, I don't know, thing with a lockout, when your lockout expires, when you can do it again or whatever. Like I think things like this are small things that can help you keep track of the content that is around there. I'm not saying that something like this is absolutely needed in Final Fantasy, but it could be fun to have some form of, like, yes, there's like a list of achievements in this area, but I don't think there's anyone ever who's used that list, not to my knowledge. I don't think people search achievements based on like the areas or whatever. I think there I actually don't know what I would suggest, but there has to be a way to entice people a little bit more to go after something.
They actually play Final Fantasy XIV for the MSQs, and then they basically take a break from the game, which is completely fine, but we are talking about MMORPG as a genre for the next 10 years. MMORPG as a genre of a video game is no longer a fresh concept, and that's why it's really important to have some form of ability to hook and retain people after they finish the MSQs, especially if they are solo players who did not join the game with any friends, like I did. Which is why I think we've seen initiatives like the Crystalline Conflict, mass casual PvP mode that is engaging. We've seen them venture towards island sanctuaries and Criterion dungeons, which are what I think are mid-core activities that will cater to the general public, to give people a reason to stay on in Final Fantasy XIV, to continue on with their subs, even after they finish the MSQs. Because I think Yoshi-P and team have absolutely nailed being able to bring in new players. And if they're also able to figure out their hook, they will also get the solo-oriented players engaged in a multiplayer online community, then that will put the game in a tremendous state as they gear up for the next 10 years. So that's my wish list. Are there anything you're looking forward to in the next 10 years? Let me know in the comments below. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Again, this could be a historic week for Final Fantasy XIV as we learn about all these new amazing features like Criterion Dungeons and Island Sanctuaries. So make sure to stay subscribed to the channel by clicking the button in the middle of the screen. Rest assured, I'll be covering the event on Friday. And with that said, I stream from time to time on Twitch. Feel free to swing by and say hello. And a big thank you to my Patreon subscribers. Thanks for keeping the channel alive. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you real soon.
That was a good video. If you haven't watched it on Quazi's channel, make sure to do so and make sure to subscribe as well. There's always good new stuff coming up. And yeah, I pretty much said everything that I wanted to. I'm actually gonna have to think about this a little bit and see if there's anything else that I would like to add to this. But for now, I think Quasi has had some really good points when it comes to this, and I mostly said everything that I wanted while watching. I'm curious to know what you think, so yeah, make sure to let me know in the comments as well. That's it for today.